Book 8, The Last Day, Chapter 4, The 33rd Day of Planting, Part 2 of 2. The group of 50 men Sergeant Major Healy had sent over the wall of the left canyon had been hiking for nearly half an hour when they stopped, confused. The canyon split again, and they had no idea what to do. The men turned to the staff sergeant in charge. "Now what?" someone asked. The staff sergeant spat. "It's a maze. I always hated mazes." "We're supposed to be turning back now to tell Thorne which direction to go," said another private in his early 40s. The staff sergeant scratched his head and glanced around at his new soldiers. Most of them were from the southern villages, as was he, and were likely tired of walking north, as was he. He never did find the north appealing. "What if the other walled route is the correct one?" another man suggested. "Thorne and the rest might already be heading down the other canyon." The staff sergeant shrugged. "Anyone feel like exploring either of these canyons?" A sergeant raised his hand. "I've got no problem going further. Rather uncrowded and quiet over here." A few more soldiers nodded. "I'll go with him." "So will I." "I've had enough of being crammed together like a herd of sheep." "And hearing that voice?" one man said quietly. Several others nodded in remembrance of Afra's warnings drifting down to them last night. The staff sergeant counted. "How many? 15? Good. Tell you what, Sergeant, you're in charge. You all wander that way as far as you want. If you see anything interesting, send a few men back through the canyons. Just remember which canyons you choose so you don't get lost." "Won't General Thorne wonder what happened if we don't return with all 50?" asked one nervous young man. The staff sergeant waved that away. "The general cares only about one private right now. You're safe, don't worry. Enjoy the hike," he said, saluting away the 15 others, and he turned back with his 34 to report to Sergeant Major Healy. Mari and Assistant Chorick rolled up in a wagon to the most impressive and alarming sight. Vast farmlands covered with immense clusters of would-be soldiers. Directly before her were about 200 men pretending to hack with imaginary hatchets. Beyond them were some groups trying hand-to-hand combat, but were clearly worried about actually harming each other. Others were honing their pitchfork techniques on accommodating bales of hay. And another large group near the end of the lane was taking aim with bows and arrows at haystacks with shapes tacked onto them at appropriate heights for vital human organs. Many women were standing alongside of the men, also taking their shots. "I don't believe this," Mari said under her breath as she surveyed the thousands of Salemites pretending to be fighters. "They're all going to die. Simple as that, the foolish people." She spied Eltana Jordan, dressed in dark gray men's trousers and a dark blue men's tunic, striding toward her. "Oh, what a surprise," she snarled. "This must be the great Mari Shin." Chorick helped Mari down from the wagon and whispered, "Good luck," as Mrs. Jordan drew near. "Impressive army I've massed, isn't it?" Mrs. Jordan signaled to the thousands behind her. "Perrin could have done this years ago, and then such a day like this would never have happened." Mari ignored Mrs. Jordan's sharpness. "Eltana, good to see you up and about doing something for Salem," she said calmly. "Although I must say this is doomed to failure." "You have no hope, do you?" Mrs. Jordan put her hands on her hips. "None at all in these brave, ambitious people." "That's misplaced faith," Mari said. "Brave ambition isn't a guarantee for success. What you call brave, I consider foolhardy. What you label ambitious, I call arrogant. These people have no idea what they're up against, Eltana. How dare you let them believe that they do?" Mrs. Jordan pointed to a group of men hacking at a bale of hay with butcher knives. What makes you think they don't have a chance? I know the world's soldiers now. Trust me, there are no Perrin Shins or Shem Zenuses out there. There may be a few serious soldiers here and there, but the rest of them are no more fit for battle than these people. And then it will still be 4 against 1 at best, Murray pointed out. There's strength in numbers, Eltana. Maybe if these people had a few years of training, discipline, then maybe they could. And why don't they? Mrs. Jordan retorted. Why didn't your beloved Perrin and his best buddy Shem teach these people all they know? I still can't fathom that. This could be a great fighting force, but no. Salem is peaceful. Well, it's not now. Mari gestured madly. It is everywhere else but here. We don't have to fight. Oh, why am I telling you this? You're as stubborn and narrow-minded as the rest of the world. She pushed past Mrs. Jordan. It's them I want to talk to. She indicated a large group of women and younger children watching the soldiers practicing, and she started a quick march for them. Mrs. Jordan jogged to catch up to her. And just what do you think you're doing, Mari? Watch and see, Eltana. Don't you dare interfere with my soldiers. Mari stopped. Your soldiers? Eltana, no one in Salem owns anything, especially soldiers. But this is what it's about for you, isn't it? Revenge for Gary? You don't care one bit for these people. You never really tried to live the Salem way. You harbored resentment and anger all this time, and now you're using these gullible people to, what, kill Lemuel Thorne? Is that your goal? Yes, Mrs. Jordan declared. For me and for all these people, and even you, Mari. We kill Thorne, we change the world. Change it to what? Not all change is for the best, Eltana, I promise you. The kind of place where bitter old women like you get their way and peace-loving people suddenly want to know how to bleed a man to death is not a place I'd want to live in. Mrs. Jordan folded her arms. You were always so self-righteous, she announced smugly. Always had to tell everyone what they're doing wrong and why nothing was ever right. No wonder the world forced you from it. They were sick of listening to you. Everyone in Edge was. And now you're breathing your sanctimonious ranting here. Yes, I am. Mari spun and headed to a small tower hastily constructed, probably intended to give Mrs. Jordan or whomever else was directing the training a better view. Mrs. Jordan followed her. Get away from there, she shouted, as Mari quickly climbed the dozen steps to the top. I won't let you interrupt their training. They don't have to listen, Mari said, but I'm going to talk anyway. She hollered as loudly as she could. Everyone, I ask only 5 minutes. No, Mrs. Jordan shouted, climbing up behind Mari. There was room for only one person at the top of the stairs, and Mari gripped the railing of the platform in front of her. No one was going to get her to move until she had her 5 minutes. She has no right to speak to you, Mrs. Jordan called, as she struggled to get past Mari. Later, Mari considered how comical it must have been to see 2 gray-haired women trying to find their muscles. Mari won out of sheer stubbornness. I have every right to speak, Mari shouted. The would-be fighter stopped to watch the commotion at the small tower. This isn't the world, Eltana. Everyone has a right to speak. Now, they don't have to listen to me. That's their right. But I'm taking my 5 minutes. She slapped Mrs. Jordan's hand. Mrs. Jordan pulled back and scowled. Now, Mari shouted at the thousands of Salemites who couldn't help but be attracted by the scuffle at the small tower. I'm here to ask you what in the world all of you think you're doing. This is madness. Why are your children here? You really want them to witness your deaths and die themselves? That won't happen, someone called. We're prepared. And suddenly it hit her. The reason she was there. The reason why she didn't leave with Relf yesterday or the others this morning. the reason why she couldn't go with Perrin when he died. So startled by the revelation that she nearly blurted out, "I can't believe I've been so dense." But she kept those words in her head because she didn't need Eltana agreeing with her. Mari had stayed alive in order to remain as a witness against the world, so that she could warn these stupid, stupid people about what was coming. As she gazed across the field, she recognized a great many of the pretending soldiers. Nearly everyone in the past 25 years had taken her History of the World course or had read her text. No one in Salem had more credibility about the world than she did. She'd been preserved for this moment, to bring these senseless people back to their senses. "And what are you prepared for?" she demanded. "You have no idea what battle is like. No idea how it feels to have a sword slice through you and only injure you, not kill you. No idea what it's like to run terrified from someone larger and stronger." "No one is larger and stronger than us," someone else shouted, and hundreds loudly agreed. "You're willing to bet your lives on that?" she yelled, and the crowd fell silent. "Because that's what you're doing. The world's scrawniest soldier will be able to slice in half that gangly boy right there with the sword." It was an exaggeration, but the pain of battle wasn't. The young teenager she pointed at squirmed. "I don't understand why you're doing this. Someone please explain this. Not you, Eltana, a real Salemite." "For our homes," someone shouted. "Our farms, flocks, everything we need to survive." "That's what General Shin told us to fight for," called another man. The crowd shouted in approval. Mari held up her hands. "I know General Shin told you that, but he wasn't referring to the last day. He was trying to keep you safe until this day. Don't you remember the words of the guides? This is not your battle to fight. It's the Creator's. If you ignore his plan, you fail his plan." "I won't do it," said another man. "I won't leave behind everything we've worked so hard to build. And not just for me, but for my congregation, my family, my neighbors. I can't just abandon all that we have." "Why not?" Mari asked. A man in the middle shouted, "Why not? Do you have any idea how hard it is to get started again?" "As a matter of fact, I do," Mari told him, and nearly grinned as she realized how perfectly the Creator had prepared her for this moment. "I know exactly what it's like to leave a home I love, to leave books that I considered my closest friends, to say goodbye to memories, possessions, the graves of all those I loved, and to have nothing more than the clothing on my back to walk to a future that I knew nothing about." The crowd was silent as she continued. They'd heard her story before in her class, but not told quite like this. Today it was more than just history. 27 years ago, I came to Salem, nervous and at times terrified as to what I would find. All I knew was that the Creator told us to go, and in faith I went. Not blindly, because every previous time I followed his plan, he was right. I ran through the forest in the darkest night I've ever seen, with hazards on every side, the army right behind me, and a lightning storm before me. But I came out of it safely, and with my faith stronger than ever. And then I came to Salem, which was a far greater life than I ever could have imagined. Now, none of that would have happened if I'd said to the Creator, 'No thanks, I think I'll just handle the army on my own.' I realize you're worried, but staying here and fighting is far more terrifying than trusting in the Creator. Soon I'll be making that journey again." Mari's voice threatened to quaver, but she held it strong. "I'll weep when I again leave my beloved house, when I walk for the last time through our orchard and garden, when I touch for the last time the boulder over my husband's grave. But I know that whatever sacrifice the Creator asks of me, he will reward me again 100 times over. So what if you lose your homes? your flocks and property which you don't even own. Isn't the risk of losing your souls worse? There's a saying in the world, it doesn't matter how you begin the race, but how you end it. How tragic it'd be if you spent your entire lives living as the Creator wanted you to, and then now, at the very end of the race, you jump off the path and ignore all that you've been taught. Why fail the plan now? Mari knew she was saying the right things. Her chest burned and she felt such energy she could have flown right off the small tower. She watched their eyes as she spoke. So many were hardened and impenetrable, but others' eyes were softening. "How do you know this isn't his plan?" one man demanded. Mari firmed her grip on the railing. Her 5 minutes were probably up, but she did not care. Guide Zenas declared just the other afternoon that this is the coming of the last day. I was there, and so were many of you when he prophesied that anyone who fights, Salemites or the army, will die. What more do you need? "I don't believe him," a man near the front shouted. "This can't be it." "How can it not be it?" Mari shouted, throwing her hands in the air. "Have all of you missed the signs? Land tremors, deceit awakened, famine in the world, now the army marching upon the Creator's chosen. This is it, people!" To her relief, many of the women sitting with their children over to the side began to nod. "Professor Shin's right," one mother said loudly. "I know it. I've known it all along. I don't want to be here," she called to Mari apologetically. "And neither do my children. It's just that my husband—" "Hush, woman!" a man, apparently her husband, shouted at her, and immediately looked embarrassed by his outburst. "No!" she called back, boldly standing up. Mari wanted to cheer, but instead clenched her hands in hopeful fists by her face. "No, you said this wasn't the last day," his wife shouted, and clearly uncomfortable to do so, especially in front of a crowd. "You said that once the army destroys everything, we'll have to rebuild again, but I know that's not right. I've been trying to convince myself to believe you, but I can't. I'm sorry, but the Creator comes before you." "Before your own husband?" he bellowed in surprise. "The Creator will never lead me astray," she said, "but you have." "Why, you—" He started charging for his wife, who stood in the large group of women, but many more women stood up like a shield in front of her. He stopped, unsure of how to continue against a line of irate women. "I believe Professor Shin too," announced one of them, "and I'm taking my children with me." More women got up, probably 100, pulling their children by their hands and standing rebelliously against a line of men who didn't know what to do next. Violence, especially against one's spouse, was quite unheard of in Salem. Mari bit her lip. The tension was thickening by the second. "Choose to take them to the ancient temple site, men," she encouraged. "Bring your wives and children to safety. You still have time." A couple of men from the crowd of thousands glanced at her, then started in jogs to their wives. Mari beamed as one young man broke through the line of men holding pitchforks and rushed to his wife. Without a word, he grabbed her by the hand and snatched his little boy with the other, and continued on without once looking back. Many of the wives cheered and were joined by another husband, then another, until about 30 or 40 men had left their places in training to rejoin their wives. They didn't get to leave easily, though. Once the body of would-be soldiers saw the deserters in their ranks, they grabbed the men trying to leave. The deserters thrashed and even punched their way through the lines to reach their wives who were shouting encouragement. Mari stared in awe and horror at the sight. Never before had she seen anyone in Salem try to stop another person from making a choice, especially the right one. Never before had she seen grown men in Salem come to blows, but now fighting was breaking out in a dozen places. She bit her fist and prayed fervently for the men trying to reach their families. Each husband seemed to grow stronger as he neared, plowing through lines of angry Salemites and finally reaching the women on the other side. Each man who wanted to leave made it through, took his wife and family, and walked swiftly towards Salem. "It's only a few," Mrs. Jordan shouted to the remaining army. Mari had forgotten she was still standing behind her. "We still have thousands left." "Thousands who will miss the last day," Mari shouted louder. Many in the throng shook their heads. "We're missing nothing. Everyone will see the last day, or have you not read the writings lately?" Mari firmed her stance as thousands of men sniggered at her. "You're remembering it wrong. All of the faithful will see the last day. You, each of you here, refusing the Creator's help and insisting on doing things your own way, you are no longer faithful. If you continue, this path will only earn you a spot in the dark deserts of the Creator's prison. While your families and friends are in paradise with the Creator, you'll be alone with your regret, tormented by what you could have been, by what you could have done, if only you had remained faithful until the last day. Is a couple of sheep or a shelter of wood really worth losing your place with your family in paradise?" From her vantage point, Mari could see a few more men on the edges sneak away. She stared down the mob, trying to find more men willing to listen, willing to remember. But the decision to step away from the crowd was intensely intimidating. To walk away meant to be completely alone. If only she could help them realize they weren't alone, because some of the men who left noticed each other and quickly banded together. If only the ones in the middle could see that, she was sure more would make the difficult decision to abandon their friends. They would find help almost immediately. But first, they had to make that difficult decision on their own. She could tell that many more recognized the truth, but the longer they stood with the multitude, the light of that truth began to dim. Soon they would be able to convince themselves that she never said anything real, because the truth was too hard to take. It was just easier to follow the crowd, follow it to their destruction. "Your 5 minutes are up, Mari," Mrs. Jordan said coldly behind her. "And your time is growing short too," Mari yelled. "If you feel what I'm saying is true, leave. If not now, then before the army arrives. It's still not too late, but soon it will be. Wives and children, get out while you can, even if you go alone. Mari, get off my tower." She sighed. There was nothing more to say. But it was all right, she decided. She'd fulfilled the reason of her remaining behind. Several hundred people were now swiftly making their way back to Salem. She'd preserved a few more families, and maybe more would find their courage as well. She pushed past Mrs. Jordan and trotted down the steps back to the wagon where Chorik was waiting. "Just can't stay away from the debating arena, can you, Mari?" Mrs. Jordan called after her. "I can't imagine why you keep doing this, seeing how often you fail." Mari didn't respond, but kept walking. "Don't listen to her, Mari," Assistant Chorik said, as he kept his glare fixed on Eltana. "By my rough count, nearly 400 people have left because of your words." He shifted his gaze to her and smiled. "That's a fantastic success. Better than Guide Zenas, but don't tell him I'm making comparisons. He got maybe 50 to leave." Mari smiled resignedly and allowed him to help her up into the wagon. "Well, I feel like I accomplished something today. There are many children who are now going to have fathers at the end of everything, whereas 10 minutes ago that might not have been the case. I only wish I could have reached more," she said wistfully. "I wish I could still do more to help get the rest where they need to be." "Don't we all?" Chorik sighed. "If I were a betting man, I'd bet that several more of them will desert that ridiculous army. I think you've done a lot more good than you think you have. Time will show just how much." Young Pear smirked. Another wall. Next to him, Cloudman chuckled. Reg, Buddy, and Pal smiled miserably at it. Teach, being supported by Hammer and Iron, groaned loudly. Snarl just curled a lip, and Sergeant Beavid shook his head as he said, "These Salemites of yours are something else, Young Pear." "Yes, they are," Young Pear grinned. "They can erect a 3-bedroom house in just days. They willingly work together to harvest crops, shear sheep, and weave blankets so that they have plenty of time to spend the afternoon and evening dancing and eating and laughing together." He stared at the wall as if he could see it all again. "You admire them, don't you?" Beavid whispered. "I do," Young Pear said in a hushed tone. "I miss them. I never realized how much until just now." "And they don't steal people away, do they?" The entire security team was now listening. Young Pear smiled. "Actually, they do, but only because they want to be stolen. Rescued. Thousands of people have fled the world over the years. It all began with Guide Pax, the one the King's Guard supposedly killed, but he didn't die. He was running away from the king 165 years ago now. And all those who were guarders back then, just families, terrorized, threatened families who hated what they saw in the world and ran away to something better. They started Salem as a place of peace. The name is even a code, and it stands for Safety Assured Leaving East of Mediceti. Salem." He ignored Teach frowning, and Iron asking quietly, "Where's Mediceti? How could this be east? East of what?" Young Pear continued staring at the wall, as if they were his family. "They arrived with nothing and then built everything. What's not to admire about that?" Sergeant Beavid exhaled. "What's waiting for us on the other side of these walls, Young Pear?" "Not an army, I promise that," Young Pear said. Snarl folded his arms. "So why do you keep saying we'll all die?" Young Pear finally pulled his eyes away to focus on Snarl. "The Creator delivered our ancestors here. He promised the valley would remain safe until the last day. Then he would destroy those who tried to destroy his people." Snarl scoffed. "Ugh, another vile head. You did them, didn't you? I can see the scars in your ears. Only vile heads get tagged. You can have relapses of visions for years. Ooh, the Creator is coming." He waved his hands in the air. "He's coming to get us. Run, run." Hammer and Iron laughed nervously, almost apologetically, while Buddy, Pal, and Reg looked between Young Pear and Snarl, who had slept soundly through Colonel Offra's all-night readings. Cloudman looked up and wondered where the clouds went. The rest of the 40 men sent to follow Young Pear were now gravitating nearer to listen. "I've heard that too," Teach said, folding his arms. "And not just from Offra, but from older folks. They used to talk a lot about the Creator, but Shin, those stories were concocted by your ancestors, who used to live in the West before they settled in Idumea and branched out to the villages. They poisoned those Western lands, the one you wanted to go find. Scholars concluded that the so-called Creator was just a regular man, the mastermind and leader of those first 1,000 settlers. He was a clever dictator who died 3 years later." Young Pear tipped his head at Teach. "Does it give you comfort to believe that story?" Teach's shoulders twitched. "I suppose so." "And I get comfort from my version," Young Pear said easily. "I won't tell you what to believe. That's not Salem's way. But I will give you all the evidence I have and let you draw your own conclusions. The first great guide predicted that all of this," he gestured as best as he could with the chains confining him, "would happen. And 2 later guides verified it, seeing the same things. The land tremors, the eruption, the famine, and now the march on Salem. If all of this has happened, why won't the coming of the last day happen too?" I choose to believe he will fight this battle, Teach, young Pear went on to a captive audience. How he'll do it or who he'll choose to do it, I don't know. I rather hope he lets me help should I live so long. That gives me comfort. And Snarl, laugh all you want, I don't care. Your opinions don't affect my beliefs. He turned back to the wall. I just want to get over this and back to Salem. I always like sitting on the front row for the best shows. Beavid, smiling faintly, waved to the soldiers behind them. 30 of you head back to Thorn. Tell 'em we found another wall. This must be the way. It was afternoon, and Mari was dreading the moment. Still, she put on the well-practiced dinner smile, matching the fake smiles of the Briders, Shins, and Zenuses. Shem was standing a little way off, quietly speaking to his oldest grandson, Brighter. The rest of the grandchildren and their children were arranging themselves on the 10 horses and figuring out who would walk. There was no point in taking the wagon. They would have to abandon it in less than a mile anyway, as the Cadbys had done yesterday. The route that began from the hills beyond the Briders' pasture was less than 4 miles to the ancient site, albeit steep in some places. That 4 miles up the mountain was the concern for Ereliz and the smaller grandchildren. The families heading out now hoped to make it to the ancient site by nightfall, but should Ereliz, on a horse led by Holling, begin to suffer pains again, the party would camp for the night on a high-sheltered plateau halfway to the site. The morning light would illuminate the steeper areas on the approach to the ancient site. For now, Ereliz's pains had subsided after receiving a blessing from Uncle Pato, but no one wanted to rush unnecessarily. Selima would keep a close watch on her the entire way. Mari hugged and kissed each little and big face, and went around again just to make sure no one was skipped or hadn't been told by their mugga that she loved them. She smacked Bubba Brighter on the arm when he declared she was getting as bad as his cousin's Grandma Travado, then gave him a third hug just to prove the point. Barnos Shin told his cousin that Mugga smelled better than his Grandma Travado, and gave her another hug. It's not for long, Mugga, he assured her. Campbell put an arm around her. We'll save you a good spot. I know you don't want to miss any of the excitement. She could just come now, Holling suggested. We're traveling slowly anyway. Mari put her hands on her hips. What, I'm that slow now? The family laughed and Heisey shook her head. No, Mugga, it's just that... Mari kissed baby Jothan again. You say hi to your great-great-grandpa for me. We got word that old Jothan left yesterday. So knowing him, he's sitting on the edge of that cliff, watching for someone to come walking in. Wes nodded. He went with my older brother and his family. Great-grandma Azrar's heading up today. She's not in a hurry, but my great-grandpa's just a little excited. Mari grinned. See? I'm not the only one excited for the last day. Now, all of you, off with you. Cambo tried one last time. Come with us, Mugga. Go sit with Mr. Hafati. The two of you have plenty of stories from the good old days in Edge to exaggerate in the telling, I'm sure. Not yet, Mari whispered. Heisey sighed. Oh, I know I'd feel better with you by our side. I still remember that hot afternoon when I came out to weed a pumpkin patch with you. She looked meaningfully at her cousin Vidro. He smiled back. I remember that afternoon. We were 13. All of the cousins chuckled quietly. They knew what happened at 13, when they learned more details about their grandmother's past, first from General Shin, then corrected by Professor Shin. Mari looked down at the ground, slightly embarrassed by everyone towering over her. I believe, Vidro continued, that I began with something casual and nonchalant, such as, So, you really destroyed the world? Everyone chuckled again, having tried a similarly suave yet stumbling way of approaching the small woman they thought was merely their mugga. I remember being traumatized to hear you were the most dangerous woman in the world, Heisey recalled. Mugga, I'd love to have such a dangerous woman sitting next to me at the site tonight. Finally, Mari looked up, and it was to roll her eyes. Now, I really don't know where that came from. Most dangerous woman in the world? Ha! Her grandchildren laughed at her overly dramatic expression. That was Hogel's title. He was your great. Mari paused to count. Well, you know, Uncle Hogel Dancel, a most enthusiastic and occasionally exaggerating rector. Supposedly he was quite earnest when he told your grandfather that's what he thought about me. But then again, I was expecting Paedo at the time and was prone to rather unpredictable mood swings. Her grandchildren smiled obligingly at this story they'd heard so many times before. Mari felt embarrassed again. She was just an old woman who bored her descendants with the same old stories, and they politely acted as if it was the first time they'd heard them. She stood as tall as she could. I may have helped change the world so many years ago because I couldn't keep my mouth shut and yelled at some administrator's assistant, but I assure you I'm not dangerous. I've never made a man shake in his boots, except for occasionally your grandfather. They chuckled again. They would have done anything to get her to go with them. She couldn't understand why, though. She really didn't do that much for them. Likely they were trying to do their parents a favor. All of the attention was making her uncomfortable. Best be going, everyone. No more waiting. Then Mugga, Selima narrowed her eyes. What are you waiting for? Mari sighed and glanced at the distant southern canyon, then back at her adult grandchildren. He's coming, she whispered. The scouts have seen him. He's shackled, but he'll be the first over that wall at the canyon entrance. I plan to go with him to the ancient site, with him and my husband. Her grandchildren looked at each other with skepticism. Heisey patted her grandmother's arm. Mugga, young Perrin knows the way. He even bragged he could do it with his eyes closed. Cambo nodded. He even did it once for most of the day. Barnos chuckled along with his cousins. He tripped a few times, but he never took the blindfold off. Mari didn't smile. He's been walking blind for long enough. Her somber tone quieted her grandchildren. When I get up there, it will be with young Per and Perrin. I know it. Somehow he'll escape. He'll find his way here. I refuse to let him come home to an empty house. Heisey sighed. Oh, that's how Mama feels. And my Mama, Selima added. And as I've heard Papa Shem say on more than one occasion, I don't like it, Marishin. I don't like it one bit. She hugged her grandmother one last time. But as the mother of 3 sons, I do understand. Mari pulled out the dinner smile again. Then mount up. Your children are happy and napped, but that won't last long. Reluctantly, her grandchildren headed for their horses, while Brighter and Fennec Zenas ran over to Mari. She squatted, ignoring the cracking of her knees, and hugged them both. Be good. Have fun. I love you. Fennec gave Mari a kiss on her cheek and took off running to the pack horse he would share with Brighter. As luck put him on, Mari turned to Brighter's sober face. Grandpa Shem said you're happy about the last day, he said. I am, Brighter. I have been for a long time. It will be scary at times, I know, but it will also be amazing. My father has already told me I'll get to see him again. He's counting the seconds. Brighter chanced a small smile. Really? I haven't seen him since I was 15, so I can hardly wait. Brighter glanced back to his 5-year-old brother. Fennec thinks Pugga will be there. I know he will be, Brighter. Her voice trembled at the idea. Somehow, sometime, we'll both know he's there. I promise it will be wonderful. So, Mugga, why is everyone afraid? Why are some people staying to fight? She sighed. Oh, that's a good question, Brighter. I don't really know. I guess we're afraid because we don't know what's coming next. But you're old. You're supposed to know everything. She grinned. I wish that were true. But there's still lots of things I don't know. But this I know. Your papa and mama and grandparents will do all they can to take care of you. You may still have scary moments, but in the end it will all be wonderful. Can you be brave until the end? I believe every story has a happy ending if you just wait long enough. Brighter pondered that for a moment, then nodded. Mari kissed him. I love you, Brighter. Now go and save me a spot with a good view. Brighter kissed her cheek and ran to his father. Lek lifted him up and put him behind Fennec. Selima was already seated on a horse, while Dek checked the belt securing Selima's youngest son, plump Perrin, in front of her. Lek took the reins of the horse and waved one last time to Mari. A few minutes later, the train of horses, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren started the trek north, then west. The 3 sets of grandparents and 1 great-grandmother waved and watched silently until their descendants climbed the hill and out of view. Sun's going down soon, Cloudman noticed. It just gets darker in the canyon sooner than anywhere else, young Perrin explained. But, Sergeant, I think it would be a good idea to find a place to camp. We shouldn't go any further today. We can't, actually. Beavid looked around. This is a pretty good area. We can stop at the next wall. That should be coming up soon, Reg said. He, Buddy, and Pal had jogged ahead earlier to see how many more walls there were. When they saw the next one in a narrow, steep passage, 50 feet high, and requiring a system of ropes to climb it, they already knew Salem would wait at least one more day. As the afternoon had advanced, the walls had become higher, making their progress even slower. Beavid glanced behind them. Thorn and his accompaniment were only a few minutes behind. Snarl, go tell the general we think we should stop at the next wall for the night. Let the rest of the army try to catch up while we figure out a way to fashion ropes. Snarl rolled his eyes like a pouty teenager, but slowly started back to Thorn. I don't like him, Cloudman said quietly to young Pear. He's not a nice man. Because he doesn't like vile heads like us? Cloudman shrugged at that. Tell me more about the jobs people have, he said, changing the subject. Some people have different jobs every year. Teach picked up his step to get closer to young Pear. Hammer, Iron, Buddy, Pal, and Reg were already there, intrigued to hear more about life in Salem. Young Pear had spent the afternoon telling them the way Salem really was. You can have any kind of job, and someone's always willing to train you doing it. Before I joined the Army, I worked with a rancher, scout, doctor, and even spent some time with men who used to serve in the Army of Idumea, all to help me decide what I wanted to do first. Some people stay with a job for years. Others change all the time. And there aren't specific jobs for men or women. I knew women doctors and men basket weavers, women shepherds and men quilt makers. Whatever you want to explore and try, you can. None of the soldiers replied for a moment, lost in the idea. Eventually Teach cleared his throat. How can women be smart enough to be doctors? I suppose you could ask that of the president of the Salem University, young Pear said slyly. She could probably explain it to you. Seeing Teach's aghast expression, he continued. Half of the professors are female. The head of the history department was a little old woman, about 74 now. Young Pear smiled at the thought. She even wrote the textbooks, updating them every few years. What everyone in Salem knows about the world comes from her and those from the world she interviews. Teach grunted. Huh, was all he could come up with. So there's really no shops? Reg asked. I still can't get over that. You just walk into a storehouse, and they give you whatever you want?" Young Pear nodded. "Within reason. If you have a need, they'll fill it. Food, clothing, house, whatever." "For free?" "For free. Everyone works, everyone benefits." Beavid shook his head. "I can't imagine a life without worrying about getting paid." "Sounds kind of nice to me," Cloudman smiled. Buddy nodded. "To me, too." Pal shrugged. "I just don't think it would work. How can it? Gold and silver is what makes the world do things." "Not in Salem," Young Pear said. "Care for each other makes Salemites do things." Iron scoffed. "Ugh, I don't believe it. It's not possible." "Believe it or don't believe it," Young Pear said. "Salem isn't hampered by your inability to believe in it." "I can't believe in elephants," Hammers said. "Seriously, Shin? You know men who've touched elephants?" Pal said. Young Pear grinned. It was easier and easier to smile whenever he thought of Salem. "One even climbed on top of a big male. He didn't stay there for long, but—" "So how far away are they?" Beavid asked, glancing behind him to see how much longer they had until the general caught up. 1,400 miles, about," Young Pear said. Hammer scoffed. "But no one can travel that far without dying." "Sure they can," Young Pear said easily. "Salem has sent 9 expeditions in the last 20 years. Before that, 2 different groups even went all the way around the world. It's 24,000 miles around, with huge lands and larger seas and animals and trees and flowers and glaciers and deserts and even more ruins no one has ever imagined before. There are hundreds of men in Salem who have gone on the expeditions, along with several dozen women. Scientists, writers, explorers, artists. They've written books, drawn pictures, made full-size paintings of the animals, and seen all kinds of things you can't even dream about." Beavid exhaled. "Ah, that's just too—" "Ridiculous," Teach exclaimed. "Can't be true. Elephants are mythical." "What about Wapiti, Teach?" Young Pear asked. "Mythical as well." "Teach, what if I told you I've seen Wapiti? We call them elk, though." "I'd call you a liar, Shin. You think Thornweave's a good story? Yours are preposterous." Young Pear grinned. "I've also eaten Wapiti. Great jerky. I hope we'll find a herd of them in the hills near Salem. The forests here are dead, but further north we should be able to find some preposterous animals for you." Teach grunted again and looked around for hiding elk. "Young Pear," Buddy elbowed him. "What about lions? Are they real?" "Yep, and zebras, too. Black and white striped horses. Very unrideable, though. Better success with the elephants." Buddy chuckled while Cloudman sighed. "Let's go there, Young Pear, right now. A little more than 1,000 miles, that's not too far. We could do it in a few seasons, right?" "Faster than that, Cloudy, with the right animals and supplies." Beavid eyed him. "That's how you know so much about the western lands, isn't it? You've probably even been there." Young Pear winked at him. "Twice, and I've eaten bison." "I'll go with you, Young Pear," Cloudman decided, "to find those elephants. Can we get supplies from the storehouses?" "Sure. Let's first get this little problem of the last day out of the way. Then it's you and me, Cloudy. Far west until we find elephants." Cloudman grinned, and several of the soldiers chuckled at his eagerness. They heard a whistle and looked back at the general. He was gesturing for them to set up camp there. He could see the wall, and it was obvious they were going no further that day. "No more talking about the future," Cloudman said in a low voice to Young Pear. I don't want Thorn to hear you. He might want to go with us to find the elephants, but he'd be no fun at all." Young Pear almost laughed. "It's getting dark, isn't it?" said one of the 15 soldiers lost in the canyon. They had walked for hours looking for an outlet, but found none. So they continued in a slightly downhill manner, hoping to find something, but only encountered more mountains, more canyons, more twists and turns. The sergeant sighed. "I'd noticed that a few minutes ago. There's no hope of returning to the rest of the army," he said, looking behind him. It wasn't as if he knew the way, either. He lost track of which way to go about 2 hours ago, but didn't dare admit it. Another man smiled. "I don't mind. We can camp here with far more space and silence." "Yes," another soldier agreed. "I swear, some men never sleep and are determined to not let anyone else sleep either." He glared at the other men around him to make sure none of them were that kind. They all held up their hands, offering no argument. "And I don't think Afra knows where we are either," suggested another man. Their sergeant smiled. "Well then, I suppose we will enjoy a quiet night here under the stars and I really have no idea where we are," he confessed. "Does it matter, sir?" "No, it doesn't. I think we deserve an early night. Any objections?" There were none. Shem heard a strange sound coming from his bedroom as he made his way up the stairs. He quietly pushed open the door and saw his wife sitting on the bed, her shoulders shaking. "Calla, my love, are you crying?" She quickly wiped her face and turned to him with a sweet smile. "No, not at all." Shem sat down and wrapped his arms around her. "Salemites are such terrible liars." She snuggled into his chest. "I'm sorry, Shemmy. I just feel so empty. Lek and Salima and the boys, Miki and Clyde, then tomorrow Boscos and Noria. One part of me knows all of this is right and good, but another part of me looks at their quiet houses and they're all gone. I just can't get past this horrible feeling. All of Salem is vanishing. All that we've built is just waiting for the worst. It's all ending everything. I shouldn't put this on you." "Oh, Calla, Calla," he said, rocking her. "You're the one I worry about the most, yet I'm hardly ever here with you. I've been neglecting you, haven't I?" "No, no. You've always cared for everyone and everything. I'm happy to share you." He kissed her again. "You're amazing. You know that?" "Shem," she sat up and wiped her nose. "When are you going?" "When the solid black banner flies. I promise. That's what Perrin always said. When Thorn or the army is spotted, the black banners fly and the tower men leave. So will Pato and I. We'll keep Clark 14 and Silver saddled and waiting for that moment." Calla pulled away. "Only 2 horses?" "Yes. Why?" "What about me?" "Deck said he'll personally choose the horses for you, Lilla, Jatesy, and Mari. The fields before the route beyond his pasture are filling with abandoned horses and wagons. He's going tomorrow morning to retrieve the most steady mounts he can find. I really wish I could see Mari on a horse again," he chuckled. "Shem?" "Yes?" "Tell him to find a fast Clark for me, too. I can still ride, you know." "Of course you can. But when Deck takes you—" "No, Shemmy, that's not what we discussed." Shem sighed. "I know what we discussed, but you're going with Deck. Zadok and Cephas have already agreed to help him when Deck says it's time. We've decided that—" "Wait a minute. You've decided? As in you and Deck?" "And Pato," Shem confessed. "We discussed it earlier this evening. Deck and Zad will choose horses from the base of the route, bring them to the barns tomorrow morning, then you are leaving. All of you. The children as well by midday meal. Pato and I will remain to see the black banner rise. Calla, it's going to happen very soon." "No!" she shouted at him. Shem nearly fell off the bed in surprise. "You and me, we've discussed this. Lilla won't go either, not without Pato, and—" She stopped. "And young Pear?" Shem asked. "Mari won't go until she sees him coming home. She won't leave without Perrin." Shem closed his eyes. "You women are the most stubborn, illogical—" "We're illogical and stubborn because we love our equally stubborn men," Calla declared. Shem began to chuckle. "Yes, we're stubborn too. And I'm going to win this one, Calla Travato Zenas." "Oh, I'd like to see you try." "Don't make me pull rank, my love." Calla narrowed her eyes. "The guide can't force anyone." "But the sergeant major can. I've never retired or turned in my resignation, you know." Calla began to smile. "You have no authority here." "Oh, yes, I do. I actually have more authority than Lemuel. I've been serving much longer, just somewhere else. But in a battle, I have seniority." "So go already!" Calla exclaimed. "Go take charge of the army of Idumea and order them back to Edge." Shem grinned. "I've thought of that. Somehow I don't think they'd listen to me. John's planning to give them another disturbing night, but I don't know if they'll listen to him either." Calla kissed him. "But I listen to you." "Will you listen now, my love?" "Shem, I don't want me to worry, right? Want me to know that you're safe and secure so that I can rescue any stragglers or Salemite fighters with a sudden change of heart? I won't have to worry about any of my children or nieces or nephews or in-laws because they're already on the trail, several hours ahead of me." Calla bit her lip. "You make it sound as if you think they'll make it tomorrow." "Woodson sent a message this evening," Shem whispered. "The sword banners will go up in the morning, calling for complete evacuation, although I don't think there's anyone left except us at the estates and Eltana's army. Cephas reported that Salem is extremely quiet, and the routes are packed all the way up the mountains. Calla, the army is only 2 walls away." Calla's mouth hung open. "Why didn't you tell us they're so close?" "We don't need everyone panicking. Whoever is still here needs to sleep well so they can leave first thing in the morning. But Pato and I told Dick." "Where's young Pear?" "Still at the lead, chained, and with 9 other men. They stay very close to him. He's doing most of the talking, but he's too far away for the scouts to know what he's saying. Thorne and his contingency are following at a safe distance, as if they think any attacks will hit young Pear and his group first." Calla actually growled. "Sending young Pear first as bait! If ever I get my hands on that Thorne—" "You're not going to." Calla grumbled under her breath. Shem blinked at her rancor. "I don't know when I've ever seen you like this." "Shem, the happiness of my little sister rests in Lemuel's hands. If he destroys young Pear after letting him get so close to home—" Shem took her arms. "It's all in the Creator's hands, Calla. Do you believe that?" She took a deep breath. "Yes, I do." "Then there's nothing more we can do, except go with Dick when he tells you it's time. Pato and I may be elsewhere when the banners rise, but Dick has promised to stay here and get everyone moving. Remember, he has a bullwhip, and I don't know of another man more accurate than him. I have given him permission to use it." Calla leaned against her husband. "Don't let anything happen to you. Remember, I want to stand next to you on the last day." He kissed her again. "Guide Gleese told me I'd be there, remember? Pato and I both. You don't need to worry about us. Just save us a good spot, all right? I don't want to miss any of it." All right, Shemmy. I'll go with Deck. I'll even force Lilla to go, and Mari. Although Deck will likely need to pull out his calf roping skills to get them to go. That night, Mari looked out the dark windows to an even darker Salem. Its light was leaving, heading up the routes. Nearly every section of Salem was on the move now. By dawn, the last of Salem would be walking west, if anyone was left. Many had scurried out at nightfall, wanting to sleep in the cover of the forest just in case. In a strange way, Mari thought, it was happening so fast. The end was coming very soon. She peered out the windows, hoping to see if there was any other candlelight like hers out there, flickering. But there was nothing. Then again, it was also very late, so whoever was still around was probably already trying to sleep in order to get an early start in the morning. But how anyone could sleep with the knowledge that this was the last night in their beds ever, she couldn't imagine. They must be up, just like her, looking out their windows one last time, maybe even seeing her candlelight and wondering what she was doing to pass the long hours. Reading, but even the writings couldn't keep her focus, although she felt the need to keep them open on her lap. She sighed and looked at the page. The first horse riders. She wasn't too keen about that. Instead, she thumbed through the pages, letting them flip through her fingers. What should she be reading on her last night in her beloved dream house? The book fell open at a page, and she shook her head at it. Not that one. She thumbed through the book again, and again it fell open at the same spot. Maybe because she read it so often in the last year and a half. Still not wanting to address those words, she once again tried to look for something else, then suddenly found herself unable to move. The writings, falling open yet again to the same determined page, demanded to be read. Every surface of her body tingled with it. Read this now. Mari's mouth went dry as she smoothed the paper. Before the last day, even the aged of my people will strike terror in the deadened hearts of the fiercest soldiers. On the last day, those who have no power shall discover the greatest power is all around them. On the last day, those who stay true to the plan will be delivered as the destroyer comes. I have created this test. I have given this plan, and I will reward my faithful children. The words hit her with such a force she could barely breathe, especially the first line. Before the last day, even the aged of my people will strike terror in the deadened hearts of the fiercest soldiers. She couldn't pull her eyes from that line, her mind repeating it again and again without her willing it to. Each word seemed different tonight, and altogether they created something very specific and deliberate, and very pointed, as if straight at her. The last time that passage hit her so strongly was the morning after Perrin proposed to her. She had read it, feeling something heavy overcome her, so she slammed shut the book in complete surprise. Then she opened it again and started reading from the very beginning. We are all family, and giddily began to think about starting her family with Perrin. Also, interestingly, that night when Perrin proposed so many years ago was the first time that she dreamed about this beautiful house with the weathered gray wood and the window boxes filled with herbs. And now she was sitting in that very house, lingering over the memory of the first time that passage hit her, as if she'd completed an enormous loop, and she'd come back to the beginning of it. And if she reached out, she could span the 46 years and tap her 28-year-old shoulder, give herself a wink, and start it all over again. For the first time, Mari realized how significant that night was so many years ago. Not because she and Perrin had started on a life more abundant and adventurous than she ever could have imagined, but because she'd been given 2 glimpses into her future. One glimpse was the house and the more than a dozen children, her 25 grandchildren, and ever-increasing numbers of great-grandchildren, running around its gardens. But the other glimpse was one that she had ignored all those years ago, and that was all right, because she wasn't meant to remember it until tonight. She looked at the calendar on the wall and considered the date, 33rd day of planting season. She searched her memory to see if it might have been significant. It was a few days after the land tremor so many years ago, and a couple of weeks before Jatesie's birthday and her and Dec's anniversary. Perrin didn't propose until the 39th day. Maybe the date didn't matter. Before the last day, even the aged of my people will strike terror in the deadened hearts of the fiercest soldiers. She couldn't stop staring at the words, which in the past she'd always skimmed, assuming they were symbolic or indicative of an overall attitude, because the following lines were always much more intriguing, especially the tantalizing idea of the deliverer and who that might be. She had to admit that a few times she wondered if it couldn't have been her own husband. But after Perrin passed, Mari finally deduced the deliverer's identity. It was Shem. He had delivered the Shins and so many other families. So of course there was no one else that it could be, and Mari couldn't have been happier about it. But had Shem figured that out? Doubtful. He'd never assume such an honor for himself. Not until the last day would he probably put it all together. And even then, the Creator would most likely have to point his great finger and call down from the sky, "Yes, Shem Zenas, it is you." Mari chuckled to herself, but annoyingly found her eyes drawn to the first line of the passage yet again. Before the last day, even the aged of my people will strike terror in the deadened hearts of the fiercest soldiers. Specifically the words, even the aged. Try as she might, she couldn't force her eyes beyond the line. The words settled on her with such a gentle yet overwhelming force that she felt it in every fiber. Yes, Mari Pedo Shin, the aged of my people who will strike terror, it is you. She slammed the book shut. "Oh, slagging Zenas is not again," Teach moaned. They had just made themselves as comfortable as possible in the canyon, laying out their bedrolls up against each other to make enough room for all the soldiers trying to find a horizontal place to sleep. Young Pear's security team had encircled him. Snarl was already snoring when the voice came drifting down to them. John Offra had another position on a summit above them and was calling down something new. Young Pear grinned as he recognized the prophecy of Guide Pax and what the guide saw when he first set eyes upon that massive valley that would become Salem. "The inhabitants of this new city will live in peace until the end comes, when the enemy will threaten to annihilate them." The echo in the canyon was shorter, but it carried Offra's words well, bouncing between the walls. "But before that time, the Creator will send one to prepare them. From the highest ranks of the enemy will he call one to mark the path of escape for the valiant." "Pugga," young Pear whispered proudly. Ever since he was little, he'd been taught those lines were about his grandfather. He'd been named High General when he left the ranks of the enemy to go to Salem and prepare their paths to the ancient temple site. "The Deliverer will ensure the safety of the Creator's people until the coming destruction." Somewhere behind him, Thorn sat up. "Offra, shut up!" Young Pear was sure the quiet snickering he heard nearby came from Sergeant Beavid. "Nope," sang down a cheery voice, startling them all. "Because, Lemuel, you need to understand this prophecy. It's referring to the last day, and that coming destruction, it's coming to destroy you. The inhabitants of this new city will live until I destroy them," Thorn bellowed. "Shut up already, both of you!" Someone further up the canyon bravely shouted back, and young Pear snorted into his hands, as did most everyone else around him. They may not have been standing up to Lemuel Thorn, but they certainly didn't admire or even respect him, and losing his temper in front of everyone wasn't helping things. "We'll live in peace until the end comes, when the enemy will threaten to annihilate them. Now, Lemuel, I'm going to repeat this passage from Guide Packs only about, a dozen times before I move on up the canyon. You've brought a lot of boys with you, haven't you? They all get a bedtime story, all night long if my voice holds out. But before that time, the Creator will send one to prepare them. From the highest ranks of the enemy will He call one to mark the path of escape for the valiant." Young Pear fell asleep to the soothing words of Guide Packs and dreamed about going home. And that is the end of part 2 of 2 of, I've lost my notes, Chapter 4, The 33rd Day of Planting. Just wait till the next chapter. There's 12 parts. So, yeah, hang in there, friends. Thank you.